track them down. Okay, Juliet. So Juliet's going to talk about a project called Monitoring Seabirds in the New York Bight to inform climate solutions and ocean health. And welcome, Juliet. And this is a pretty simple go backwards, and that's your pointer.
All right. Okay. Great. Thank you all. I'm really excited to be here and talk about some work we've started over the last few years to monitor seabirds here in the New York Bight and around Long Island. So you may ask, why study seabirds? Well, as you can see from this example, seabirds tend to exist where other things also exist in the ocean. If you ask a fisherman, they'll tell you if you want to find the fish, you follow the birds. It's also, if you want to find the whales, you follow the birds. If you want to know what's going on under the surface of the ocean, seabirds can be a really good way to get a sense of what's happening. And as you can see from this figure, seabirds are at the top of ocean food webs. They're top predators. They're also very wide-ranging, so they integrate conditions across huge amounts of ocean area, ocean basins. This is an example of the Arctic tern that migrates all the way from the Arctic to the Antarctic every year and back again. So they're really kind of showing us what's happening at huge spatial scales in the ocean. And they also respond to things that are happening at different time scales because they live for a really long time. So you might have heard of Wisdom the albatross on Midway Atoll, who's in her 70s now and still raising chicks, which is kind of intimidating and impressive. But there's also, really short-term responses. So how many chicks birds raise in a given year can tell you what's happening from a year to year. And then long-term, how many birds are coming back to their colonies each year, and the populations can tell you what's happening over really big time scales. And so there's a lot of work going on right now to figure out how to take data from seabirds and help us to understand ecosystems better. So this is an example from Alaska. They put together this report card with the little smiley eggs and the frowny eggs, and that tells you in any given year how well the seabirds are doing. And that information actually goes into things like fisheries management. So understanding, okay, if you see seabirds doing poorly in one year, maybe a few years later, the fish that they're eating are going to be big enough to be commercially fished. And so we kind of have an advanced warning of maybe something's happening with these fisheries. And so these data are actually going into sort of a lot of different aspects of environmental monitoring and understanding marine conditions. And part of the reason for that is that seabirds are also doing different things over different parts of the year, right? So seabirds are breeding at terrestrial colonies during their breeding seasons, which vary depending on where they are in the world. Then they migrate to non-breeding areas, which can be, as with the Arctic tern, an entire hemisphere away, potentially. And then they come back again. And so when we start to look at this annual cycle, if we can follow seabirds across the entire year, we can see where are they at risk, where are the locations where they're encountering risks in the environment. Also, when are they at risk? What are the periods during the year that they're potentially experiencing either mortality or loss of productivity? And then finally, are there specific birds that are at risk? So are there individuals like are younger birds more at risk than older birds? Are males more at risk than females? And how does their habitat use kind of mediate their exposure to all sorts of different threats in the environment? So since we're here at Stony Brook, most of you have probably heard Heather Lynch at some point give a talk about penguins and these, sexy, impressive birds. And you might be thinking of that when you're thinking about seabirds and thinking, okay, seabirds live far away. They're kind of David Attenborough style. But here in Long Island, we have some really, really cool seabirds. So that's foraging aggregation of northern gannets right off Jones Beach, which for my money is one of the more impressive seabird sites you can see anywhere in the world. And then here on the bottom, we have a common tern with some little cute fluffy chicks on Great Gull Island, which is a hemispherically important seabird breeding colony right here off Orient Point. So the species that we're working on here in the New York Bight, we're kind of looking at a variety of species, and I have here the offshore wind energy developments that are either current or planned in the area as well, since that's a big part of what we're doing, is trying to understand distributions of birds in relation to stressors like offshore wind energy. So we have two non-breeding species that we've been working with. So these are species that are only here in the New York Bight during their non-breeding season, and then they go far away to reproduce. So there's the northern gannet that's here during our winter, and then the great shearwater that's here during our summer and actually breeds in the southern hemisphere during our winter. We also are tracking a year-round resident, the great blackback gull, which many of you are probably familiar with from beaches and potentially garbage dumps. And then we also have 2 species of terns that we're tracking from Great Gull Island, so the common tern and then the federally endangered roseate tern. And you can be forgiven for not being able to recognize those out in the wild. The differences are very subtle, and they're very closely related to one another. So the great thing about this project is getting to do a lot of cool field work with a lot of great people, both in the winter and in the summer. So in the winter, we go out and we catch gannets. In the summer, we go out to the breeding colonies for the gulls and terns, and we also go out at sea to catch shearwaters. And so far, we've tracked, over the past sort of 2 to 3 years, we've tracked over 100 individual birds and gotten over 1,000 individual GPS locations from those birds. And so hopefully this will work. I'll take you out into the field to show you how we catch shearwaters. It might not be working. Okay, here we go. So it took us a while to figure out how to do this. We essentially have a hula hoop. It's too bad that the previous video didn't work because that shows all the failures where we didn't actually catch the birds, which are a lot more frequent than the successes like that. But you have to have really long arms, so you throw out this hula hoop net with a net over the floating hoop, and then we'll go out with a boat hook and pull the bird in. And hopefully they're tangled just enough that they stay in the net long enough for us to pull them into the boat, but not so much that we have sort of a hard time pulling them out of the net, which is the case with this guy. So we'll usually find birds kind of sitting on the water soon after they feed, especially with the gannets. That's the best way to get them because they can't take off right away. So we can kind of get in close and hopefully get the hoop over the bird. So yeah, we got the bird in the hand, get the just caught by the wing, pull the wing out of the net, and then we'll put it in a bag and start doing our measurements and attaching our transmitter. So this is all the tracks just zoomed in right here on the New York Bight that we've gotten so far over the last few years. So you can see these birds move around quite a lot. And we're covering pretty much the entire area across all these different species. And zooming out even further, we also have species like the gannets moving up to Canada to breed, the shearwaters moving even further, which I'll show you in a bit, and then the terns migrating down to the Caribbean and then down on from there to South America. So we're really connected via these birds to the entire hemisphere, basically. So just a few of the cool things that we've found so far. So this is an example from gannets where we're trying to figure out, so what are sort of, even at the level of during a single day, what are the times when birds are most at risk? And what you can see here is, so this is time of day across the bottom, and this is the early morning, so like 6 or 7 in the morning. Birds are moving around a lot. So the yellow is commuting movements where birds are moving back and forth from their roosting areas offshore to their feeding areas closer to shore. And then the pink is foraging, where the birds are actually diving, like that photo I showed you from Jones Beach. So really that's mostly what they're doing at those early hours of the morning. So we know that birds are really active at that time. And so for things like a wind energy development, you might expect a lot of traffic going back and forth through these areas when birds are moving early in the morning. So that could be kind of a time when risks would be higher. We can also zoom out to the level of the calendar year. So we captured gannets both early and later in their non-breeding season. And what we found is that earlier in the season, they're moving around a lot. They're trying to find good spots to spend the winter. And later in the season, they're foraging a lot. So they're getting ready to breed. They're not moving around as much. So they might be kind of camped out in an area and just foraging more. So understanding how birds are using these habitats differently across the year can also help us to pinpoint, okay, so when are they potentially experiencing exposure to different risk factors? And then we're also looking at differences between individuals. So this is a video, short video, showing how we catch gulls and how we measure them.
Hi, my name is Juliet Lamb. I'm a marine scientist with the New York division of the Nature Conservancy. And we're out here today on Block Island, Rhode Island, tagging great blackback gulls. We've also tagged birds on South Dumpling Island in Long Island Sound off of New York. And once we get a bird, we like to take a lot of measurements to figure out whether it's a male or female and how healthy it is and things like that. So we'll start out by weighing the bird. So we put the bird into a pillowcase, which is about the right size to hold a gull, and we hang it from a scale that looks like this. And that gives us the weight of the bird plus the bag. Then we subtract the bag and we've got the bird. Next, we put a band on it. So we use these pliers and we put a little metal ring around its leg. That way, if anyone ever finds the bird again, it has a unique number on it, a 9-digit number, and they can read that number and they know where it was
I say
banded
little,
and
but
who
if you're
banded
used to
it and how long
songbirds,
ago.
it's
We'll
pretty
also
big.
measure the length of the wing using a wing rule, and that tells us sort of how big the bird is relative to its mass. So if a bigger bird has a smaller mass, it's in poorer condition. If a smaller bird has a bigger mass, it might be in better condition. And then we take a couple of other measurements too. So we're using these calipers. We'll measure the bill length and the head plus the bill, so from the back of the head to the tip of the bill, and that gives us whether it's a male or a female. The males are bigger than the females, and we also measure its leg using this same tool. So using all these measurements, we can get an index of the bird's size, its health, and its sex, and we can compare those measurements to the data that we're getting from our GPS transmitters to see if, say, birds in better condition are traveling further, if males are using different foraging areas than females, and kind of understand how this individual variation between the birds shapes the habitats that they use.
So what does that actually look like in practice? So this is those two colonies I mentioned, so South Dumpling Island here in Long Island Sound in blue, and then Block Island in red. One thing is that during the time that we were doing this tracking, the Revolution Wind Energy area began construction, and we can see gulls going out to that area. So gulls are really curious. If there's a lot of vessel activity, they're going to go check it out, and they really seem to be kind of homing in on that activity out there. But another thing is you can see there's almost no overlap between these colonies, even though they're really close together. They could easily go back and forth. So gulls seem to like their space. They like to be kind of territorial. And this is actually, there's some other seabirds that we've documented the same thing, where colonies have their own foraging areas and don't really overlap. So this kind of shows that where a bird is nesting determines where it's kind of foraging and where it's exposed to risk out in the marine environment. We also found out that the sexes are doing really different things. So all of the females that we tracked migrated away from the colony during the winter. Most of the males that we tracked stayed close to the colony. But what we found was essentially, so females are moving, they're moving up to Maine, they're moving all the way down to North Carolina during the winter. They're migrating pretty long distances, but they're staying really close to the coast all year. Whereas the males that are staying around here for the most part are starting to go offshore, and this happens between December and March. The males are going all the way out to the shelf break to forage, which they don't do at all during the breeding season. So even though they're staying resident in the same place, they're doing very different things. Another question is, how do we decide which species to monitor? So I mentioned the common tern and the roseate tern that are really closely related. Roseate terns are endangered, so for things like offshore wind, there's a monitoring requirement to figure out how they're being impacted. So we wanted to find out, are common terns and roseate terns kind of doing the same thing? Could we monitor common terns to see what roseate terns are doing? And the answer is yes. Those are the areas that they're using at sea, and the purple are the commons and the green are the roseates. So they're pretty much using the same areas, but between these 2 years, 2024 and 2025, they're using really different habitats. So 2025, there wasn't as much food available. Birds are moving really far away. So this tells us that we can use a surrogate species, but we have to monitor across multiple years to really understand what's going on. And then how do we figure out how to manage populations for birds that are here only during part of the year? So these gannets, all of their breeding colonies are up in Canada. That's where they're going during the summer. They're only here during the winter. Shearwaters, their breeding colonies are down in the southern Atlantic Ocean, way out in the middle of the water. They're migrating all the way across to Africa and then down to South America. So if we can link the birds that are here to their breeding colonies, a lot of the management actions we can do for seabirds happen on their breeding colonies. They're things like eradicating rats that are preying on chicks, building better breeding habitats. And so if we know where the birds are going, then we know where we can do these management actions. And then looking at this gull example, this is the area that the gulls are going to, the male gulls in the winter, which you might recognize if you're familiar with the outer continental shelf here. As Hudson Canyon. So this is also a hotspot for fishing activity, and it's proposed as a potential marine sanctuary. So understanding that gulls are really relying on this habitat during the winter in a way that we weren't really aware of before helps us to understand how to manage these areas as well. And then finally, for these terns on Great Gull Island, we have a crew, Becca, who's out here somewhere, was out there monitoring birds during these past few years. And what we can do is actually see what fish the birds are bringing into their chicks. So terns carry their fish in their bills. We can see how big they are. We can see what species they're eating. And we can get a sense from year to year of how their prey base might be better or worse or different between years. So our work is impacting a lot of different aspects of management in the area. So things like collision risk modeling for wind farms, our data are feeding into those models. We're looking at site selection for future wind energy areas. We're looking at developing monitoring and mitigation plans for some of these species, particularly endangered birds. Fisheries management, so using some of these diet data that we're collecting from places like Great Gull Island to help understand fisheries. And then collaborating with a lot of different partners who are working on other species to try to get a bigger picture of what's happening in the marine environment. And then this is also international. So we're working with partners in Canada, in India, in Europe to kind of take the lessons that we're learning here on Long Island and export them. So with that, plenty of people to thank. There's huge teams involved with this work. And I don't know if I have time for questions, but my email's down there. I'm always happy to talk anything seabirds with anyone who's interested. Thank you very much.